Wendy, thank you very much. I do feel well mic'd up. So thank you, Wendy, for introducing me. Thank you also for you and all the organizers for inviting me to speak at your event. I'm slightly underwhelmed with this. I'm sort of don't feel qualified to talk of big data. I'm a naval architect, a ship designer. I teach ship science. I teach engineering mathematics, a little bit of structures and materials, and I'm trying to see how this won't go up or keep changing. So my knowledge is in engineering and naval architecture, and I'm here to learn about what big data and so on can do. But I did ask, when they approached me initially, the organizers, I did ask whether they would permit me to talk about the oceans. So I'm here with one mission in mind, to suggest to you that the oceans are very important and to request you to give some thought to bring your talents and your knowledge to helping us better understand the oceans in order that we benefit, humankind benefits from it. So the oceans are very, very important in a general sense for climate change. So the oceans are controllers of climate, of global warming, of temperature. So they control the temperature by absorbing the CO2, the greenhouse gases. They're great regulators of climate. They're also large sources for energy. We have a significant amount of energy that comes from the oceans, oil and gas from the oceans, a very significant amount. A large proportion of the food that we eat comes from the oceans. So I would say about 20% of the protein intake of humankind comes from the oceans. We are increasingly going to be looking at the oceans for mineral resources, for medicines. So the large amount of, if you like, use that we can make of the oceans. The oceans are highways of trade. 90% of world trade is from ships. So there's a large amount of, if you like, use for our oceans. So that's where I begin. And I also come to the viewpoint that we must have technology that is deployed to make sure that we harness if you like, the resources in the oceans in a good way. And with that, if you like, perspective of using technology, I'd like to introduce this sort of report. And I'm looking to see, I left some papers over here, which, we've been spending some time with Lloyds Register, with Kinetic and the University of Southampton, over a significant period of time, looking at gazing into the future. Lloyds Register is an organization that has a 255-year history looking at safety of ships and all marine artifacts in the ocean. Safety of ships, the people that they carry, and the cargoes that they carry. A speaker in an hour or so will be Prof Phai Cheng, and Professor Cheng will do better in introducing Lloyds Register, I'm sure. But Lloyds Register is in this building, so we are in Lloyds Register space, incidentally. It's a new way of working for the University of Southampton, having a business in the university premises. So this building is occupied by Lloyds Register people. So we're on the ground floor, they've given it to us, donated this space to us, but upstairs there are 400 people working to keep the ocean safe for us. So that's the work upstairs. And they want to work together with the university and collaborate in terms of generating new ideas for better and safer shipping and better and safer marine structures. The other organization we worked with was a company called Kinetic, which spun out of the Defence Evaluation and Research Agency, a UK Ministry of Defence laboratories, and they contributed their expertise in terms of defence, and lastly, the University of Southampton. So we put together a team of experts who looked at three facets of ocean space. So we looked at commercial shipping, naval defence, and the third was broadly what we call ocean space. And we looked to see how technologies will look like in those sectors, in those spaces in 2030. This is future gazing. So we deployed horizon scanning technologies. We looked at what else is happening around the world in terms of populations, in terms of economies, in terms of what's happening in science laboratories. We looked at what big companies like Shell, IBM, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, Rolls-Royce, what their thinking was. We looked at what governments were doing in their strategic plans going forward. And on the basis of what we saw in university laboratories, in laboratories of research institutes, what we saw of the plans of companies, what we saw in terms of human evolution and human development in different countries, on the basis of that, we then identified what we thought were good technologies for the future. And we created a list of 56 technologies that we felt in 2030 that's where things will be, that's where they will be very important. Of those 56, we then had a set of criteria to down select 18 that we felt would be the really big hitting ones. And from those 18, we then selected 8 technologies of relevance to each of the 3 sectors. So there was going to be a bit of an overlap between some of the technologies. And so that is what I'm going to here to talk to you for a few minutes about one particular aspect. Oh, sorry, before that, just to say the report is available. It's available for free download on the internet. This report has been written with a wide-ranging audience in mind. You, researchers, students in universities, academic staff in universities. We have aimed this at John Smith, Jane Smith on the street. We want people to be involved, ordinary people to get to know the oceans and the technologies. This has been written such that the chief executives of companies can pick up this and read. Government ministers, government functionaries. We're looking at the shipping industry, mining industry, oil and gas industry, communications industry, satellite industry, and so on. So we're looking at a large range of industries to pick this up. We are saying that the future is marine. The future is the oceans. That's the next frontier. So in big data, please come and help use that. That's what the structure is. It's available. Some hard copies are there on the desks at the back, I believe. But if any of you want hard copies, let me know, or through Wendy and others, let me know. We'll get them down straight away before you leave. So I'm going to be talking for about 10 minutes or so on ocean space. What is ocean space? So I said a little bit about food and about oil and gas and energy and so on from the oceans, but just again to put some numbers. So the oceans and seas cover 70% of the world's surface, 70%. It's larger oceans than the land space. 90% of all life on Earth is in the oceans, 90% of life. And if you contrast that with another number, we know we have charted and mapped less than 5% of that space. We don't know what's going on in our backyard. We know more about the moon, about Mars, about Venus, about Jupiter, about other galaxies. We don't know our neighborhood, our oceans. And yet, our survival and well-being depends on our better understanding that space. So it's pretty dire in that sense, and we need all the talents of all the people to focus on the oceans. So that's simply what it is that I'm going to be talking about. So we identified 8 technologies, and I'm going to be about how we use this. So I'm going to focus on a few. I'm just going to focus on 3 or 4, but we had, just to list them, big data analytics, I'll talk about that. Sensors and communications, I will talk about that. Autonomous systems, I will talk about that. Then the others are advanced materials on the far left, sustainable energy generation, carbon capture and storage, deep ocean mining, and marine biotechnology. So that's there in the report, and I'm just alluding to it, and you can pick up more details from the report. But I'll focus on just those few that I've listed said just now. So starting with big data analytics. So this is the theme for this conference and for this meeting, and we've identified this as the future. In 2030, big data will be big in ocean space, really big industry. So what do we mean by that? So the oceans, as I said, are uncharted. 95% of the space we don't know. We need to know it. We need to gather the data. We need to analyze the data. We need to process the data. And I'll tell you right at the end why it's important for us, ordinary people on the street. It's important for that, for us. So, but what we're saying is that, we'll need special techniques to look at bringing together large volumes of different kinds of data, some of which will relate to physical properties of the ocean, some chemical properties, some may be biological, some may be of a numeric kind, some may be visual, some may be of auditory nature and so on. So we need to be able to look at combining all these different sets of information, coming with different levels of sanctity and at differing levels of intensity. So this is something we need help with, about getting together all the data and manipulating the data. Now, the data will be gathered from platforms. So the oceans are vast, so they're very deep. In many places, there could be many kilometers deep. So it's a case of how can we go down to those depths? What kind of devices can be put down there? What kind of vehicles can be put down there? And we're saying that the future, one of the technologies will be having autonomous systems. We've heard in the newspapers about drones. Now, these are more than drones. Drones are piloted. These won't have any human intervention. So we can see autonomous vehicles that will be given a function, that will be given a task, and they'll be given a boundary within which to operate and some constraints, and the vehicles will then go and do the task and keep giving the information back to wherever they've been asked to give, and they'll operate in a safe manner all the way through the ocean. So we can see these vehicles, autonomous vehicles, down below in the seabed. We can see them operating through the depths. We can see them operating on the surface. We can see them operating in the skies. And these are vehicles that will have the sensors, which will then gather the information, which will then be transmitted. So the third sort of aspect about where we get the data from is sensors. So that's a technology for 2030. So this is the shape of what will be, what the ocean space will look like in 2030. So we'll see lots of sensors that will be generating the data, which you will then use to calculate and do all your analysis and manipulations. But the sensors will be distributed across the bays of the oceans. They will be distributed through the depth of the oceans. They will be distributed or looking at the natural environment. So just the ocean environment, the natural environment as such. But they'll also be looking at anthropogenic activity. So if we put a ship in there, if we put an offshore structure, if we start a mining activity, so any human intervened activity will also be having lots and lots and lots of sensors which will be generating the data. So part of it is gathering the data, and the data will be coming, some of which will be public, some maybe not. But the hope is that most of the data will be open such that we can make use of it. So the data will be there through the oceans, on the ships, on the platforms, offshore platforms, and so on. And they could be looking at, as I said, physical properties of the oceans, chemical properties of the oceans, biological parameters, and they could be looking at other aspects as well. So the data will be gathered and will be communicated. So part of the communication is through the satellites. So if there are folk who are in, if you like, communications business, we need help from those people as well. So if your expertise extends to looking at transmitting data through the satellite medium, then I think that that is something you would need to see how you can help us with. So why why do we need this, and why are we saying that this will happen? And we are saying this will happen. So it's not a case of may, it will. So the more people can start thinking about it now, the more they will be at the forefront of leading what the ocean space looks like. So humanity has to adapt to climate change. It is a fact. So climate change is a fact. The Earth is warming. The oceans are regulators of climate. We will have sea level rise. And I use the word will in terms of levels of likelihood. The levels of likelihood are very high. The probabilities are very high. And therefore, I'm using the word will. So when the sea level rises, then places like Southampton, for example, are at risk. I'm thankfully on a hill, so I'm on the highest point. I live not too far away. I'm on a hill. But some of my other people near Ocean Village and so on may find themselves at risk. So there is a need for us to prepare ourselves for that. The other thing that is likely to happen is more probabilities of high or extreme events, hurricanes, cyclones, tsunamis, things like El Nino and so on. Because of the global warming, there may be, if you like, the El Nino effects coming in, and there's likelihoods of storms and frequencies going up. So we need to prepare for that. The second point on the right here, a significant proportion of the world's population lives very close to the coast. About 40–50% of the world's population will be within a few tens of kilometers of coast in 2030. A few tens of kilometers. They will be affected by what's going on in the oceans. So we need to prepare for that. The world population is increasing. And to feed them, yes, we have to use the land resources better. But I can see more and more use being made of the oceans to sustain ourselves from the point of view of giving food. So food production and particularly protein intake will become very important. So that needs to happen. So those are the kind of things that are important for us. And we then identified what would be, if you like, missions. Why should we deploy this technology? What's in it for us? For a company, yeah, they can make profits. But what about the people? We identified 3 key missions for deploying of this technology. Why, in addition to making profits, why there is a social need for this. And we said the 3 important things are protecting the people, us, number 1, we protect ourselves first. The environment we live in, protect the environment. And lastly, we have to sustain ourselves. We have to have food and energy. So these are the missions. And this is what we have detailed in the report about what the technologies would do. So we have identified in the report what each technology can do, for example, in terms of protecting the people, how, for instance, they can help with early warning, how, for instance, they can help with things like situation planning. So if we are planning a new road or a new housing estate or a new set of flats somewhere near the coast, how can we get the knowledge to say what's a good place to build some flats? So it's very, very, very relevant. It's not some esoteric stuff. It's for our very survival. So it's things that are of use to us, and that's where we need the big data coming in. How can we protect the environment? So we have to live with this environment. And we have to sustain ourselves. So we have to protect the environment. So what can we do in terms of better climate prediction and condition monitoring, ocean climates? So that is going to affect the life of, as I said, almost all of humankind, 50% directly, immediately, who are living close to the oceans. So the data that we get from the oceans is going to help in terms of climate. Is going to help in terms of how we use the oceans responsibly. So currently, for example, the fish that we get from the open seas is not enough to sustain. We have been overfishing. So how can we responsibly use the resources so that we get the fish and the other food stock for us? What do we need to cultivate? So how do we get aquaculture in? So those are things that we need to use the big data. And we need big data. So food, I've said already, but that's something we need. We need food, we need energy, we need medicines. And how can we use the data that we gather from the oceans, process that to identify where do we look for medicines, which plants give us the right kind of chemicals, how do we get that across to the factories? Do we set a factory up on the ocean, in the oceans itself, and harvest whatever it is we want to do over there and ship, the medicines ashore? So we need to see how we do this. So that's something we are speculating in the report will be the way ahead. So in conclusion, we are making this report available to the public, to everybody in the world. It's global release. It was released last week, so you're among the first to sort of get to see the report. There was a press release last week in London, and last week? Yeah, last week. So, and this is the first time I'm talking about this to an audience like you. We need all your talent to come and help us, yourselves, ordinary people, using the data from the oceans for, if you like, betterment of ourselves. Okay, and that's the key thing. So it's available for download. So the slide pack should be available to you through the organizers. But the hard copies of the report, if you want a hard copy, you're welcome to it. Please could you leave your names at the desk, and before the end of the day, we will make sure that those of you who want the report can take away a hard copy. And with that, I think I'll stop, and thank you very much again for inviting me.